The most valuable thing I bought that year was not 1,500 acres of land. It was a bridge everyone believed belonged to someone else. The morning fog still floated above the narrow river when I drove through the rust-colored steel bridge for the first time after closing on the property. Moisture clung to the weathered guardrails, and the slow sound of water moving beneath the wooden decking echoed through the quiet valley. Beyond the bridge stretched 1,500 acres of rolling timber, open pasture, rocky hillsides, and winding creeks that had not changed much in decades. That land had been my dream investment for years. It was peaceful, isolated, and completely outside the authority of the nearby Homeowners Association. At least that was the part everyone talked about. What nobody mentioned during the closing was the bridge itself. I parked my truck beside a faded county marker, stepped into the cool morning air, and listened as another pickup crossed the bridge behind me before disappearing toward an upscale neighborhood hidden among tall pine trees. A delivery van followed. Then a school bus. Then 2 joggers crossed the narrow sidewalk while waving politely in my direction. It felt unusually busy for a private bridge-serving property I had just purchased. Curious, I walked toward a small weathered sign attached to one of the steel beams. The identification number had nearly disappeared beneath layers of faded paint, but it remained readable enough to match the engineering documents resting inside the folder on my passenger seat. I retrieved the closing packet from my truck, unfolded the county parcel map across the hood, and slowly traced the boundary lines with my finger. The bridge sat entirely inside my newly acquired parcel. I checked again because the conclusion seemed almost impossible. The northern abutment, the southern support, the roadway connecting both sides of the river, every inch of it rested inside the legal description printed on the recorded deed I had signed less than 24 hours earlier. I looked across the river once more as another stream of vehicles entered the neighborhood beyond the trees. Every resident, every contractor, every delivery truck, every visitor used that bridge without a second thought. They believed it was simply part of the public landscape. I suspected very few people had ever asked who actually owned it. Back inside my truck, I opened the title documents again, reading each page more carefully than I had during the closing. The survey matched the deed. The deed matched the county parcel records. Buried inside the document package sat one folded page referencing a recorded access easement that had been established years earlier. I did not unfold it yet. Instead, I placed it back into the folder exactly as I found it because experience had taught me that old property documents rarely become valuable by accident. As the morning sun finally burned away the fog, the bridge filled with another line of commuters heading toward work. Their tires produced a steady rhythm across the expansion joints while sunlight reflected from the steel beams into the moving water below. I leaned against my truck, watched the neighborhood wake up across the river, and smiled quietly to myself. They thought I was simply the new owner of a large piece of land outside their community. They had absolutely no idea they were driving across the most important part of my property every single day. After returning home that evening, I spread every document from the closing across the large oak table in my office instead of celebrating the purchase the way most new landowners probably would. The room smelled faintly of leather, old paper, and fresh coffee while late afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows onto stacks of surveys, title reports, county maps, and engineering records. I have always believed that the most valuable part of any property is not what you can immediately see from the road. It is the history hidden inside the paperwork. Before I ever made an offer on those 1,500 acres, my attorney and title company completed a thorough review of every recorded document connected to the land. During the closing, nothing appeared unusual because the property transferred exactly as described in the recorded deed. Only after standing on that bridge did one detail begin pulling my attention back toward a folded document resting near the bottom of the file. I carefully unfolded the aging page and immediately recognized the heading. It was a recorded access easement created decades earlier between previous landowners. The paper had been copied so many times that some words appeared faded, but the county recording stamp remained perfectly clear. According to the document, residents and authorized visitors possessed a legal right to travel across the bridge in order to reach the neighborhood beyond the river. That answered one important question immediately. People could legally cross the bridge. The easement, however, answered another question that proved even more important. It never transferred ownership of the bridge itself. Ownership remained with the parcel now listed under my name. I compared the easement against the recorded deed, then against the official survey included in the title package. Every legal description matched with remarkable precision. The bridge structure, its approaches, and the surrounding parcel all rested within my property's boundary. The easement granted access. It did not erase ownership. That distinction may sound insignificant to someone unfamiliar with real estate law, but to attorneys, engineers, and surveyors, those are two completely different concepts. One grants permission to use property under defined conditions. The other determines who bears responsibility for maintaining, protecting, and legally controlling the underlying asset. Curious, I continued reading through archived engineering reports included with the transaction. Several inspections from previous years described routine maintenance recommendations for the aging steel structure, including repainting, drainage improvements, and periodic structural evaluations. None of those reports identified the Homeowners Association as the owner. Instead, they consistently referenced the private parcel number that now belonged to me. I leaned back in my chair and stared quietly at the bridge parcel highlighted across the county map. Outside my office window, evening settled across the fields while the distant sound of traffic drifted through the trees. Every commuter returning home, every delivery truck carrying groceries, every contractor heading toward the subdivision crossed that bridge believing it was simply another piece of neighborhood infrastructure. They never noticed the parcel boundary beneath the pavement because very few people ever study recorded deeds after buying a home. I placed the easement into a protective folder beside the original survey, locked both inside my document cabinet, and slipped the small brass key into my pocket. Experience had taught me that old property records rarely become important overnight. They become important the moment someone assumes they no longer matter. The first letter from the Homeowners Association arrived less than 3 weeks after I closed on the property. It was neatly folded inside a crisp white envelope carrying the community logo across the upper left corner. I opened it while standing on the porch of my farmhouse, listening to birds settling into the trees as the evening sun disappeared behind the western ridge. The tone remained polite at first. The letter welcomed me as a neighboring landowner and requested my cooperation regarding what it described as community appearance standards near the entrance corridor leading toward the subdivision. They asked that I replace sections of an old split-rail fence visible from the bridge, remove several weathered equipment sheds farther inside my property, and submit future exterior improvements for review to maintain what they called neighborhood consistency. I smiled as I finished reading because every request rested upon one simple misunderstanding. My land did not belong to their homeowners association. It had never been annexed into their governing documents, and no recorded covenant connected my parcel to their regulations. The following morning I drafted a courteous response thanking them for reaching out before explaining that my property existed entirely outside the legal jurisdiction of the association. I attached copies of the recorded parcel map showing my boundary together with the county tax identification confirming independent ownership. My letter remained respectful from beginning to end because I believed misunderstandings should always receive calm explanations before becoming conflicts. A week later another envelope arrived. This time the language sounded less welcoming. The association president, Catherine Sullivan, explained that because every visitor entering the neighborhood crossed the bridge located on my land, the surrounding area reflected upon the community's image. She encouraged me to reconsider my position and suggested attending the next board meeting so we could discuss a cooperative solution. I accepted the invitation, believing a simple review of recorded property documents would answer every remaining question. The meeting took place inside an elegant clubhouse overlooking carefully landscaped streets and quiet ponds surrounded by walking paths. Board members greeted me professionally, and Catherine introduced herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to making final decisions. Large development maps covered one wall while architectural renderings displayed future expansion plans extending deeper into the valley. Catherine thanked me for attending before explaining that the association had invested years maintaining the neighborhood's appearance and expected neighboring landowners to support those standards. When my turn came, I calmly explained that I appreciated their commitment to the community but that recorded property boundaries established where their authority ended. I placed a county parcel map on the conference table, pointed to my property surrounding the bridge, and quietly repeated that my land remained outside the association's jurisdiction. Several board members exchanged uncertain glances while studying the map, but Catherine politely dismissed the drawing as only one interpretation among many planning documents. Rather than arguing, I simply gathered my papers, thanked everyone for their time, and wished them a pleasant evening. Walking back across the parking lot, I noticed dozens of vehicles crossing the bridge on their way home beneath the fading orange sky. Every driver continued across the steel structure without slowing, believing it was simply another piece of neighborhood infrastructure. I unlocked my truck, placed the folded parcel map back beside the recorded easement inside my document case, and realized something important. The disagreement was never really about fences or appearance. It had quietly become a question of ownership, and very soon the bridge itself would answer it more clearly than either of us ever could. Over the next several weeks I decided to stop discussing opinions and start collecting facts. Every Tuesday morning, just after sunrise, I parked my truck beside the bridge with a notebook, a camera, and the same document case that held my recorded deed and the folded easement. The river flowed quietly beneath the steel beams while commuters crossed overhead without slowing, completely unaware that every passing vehicle reminded me how important that bridge had become. I hired an independent licensed surveyor to verify every property boundary using the original county records rather than recent planning maps. Watching him work felt almost peaceful. Bright orange equipment stood beside weathered steel survey monuments while satellite receivers quietly calculated precise positions across the valley. Every measurement matched the recorded deed exactly. The bridge, both approaches, the supporting embankments, and the surrounding parcel all remained entirely inside my property boundary. A week later I retained a structural engineering firm to inspect the bridge itself. Their assignment had nothing to do with restricting access. I simply wanted to understand the condition of an important piece of infrastructure that legally belonged to me. The engineers photographed every beam, expansion joint, drainage channel, concrete abutment, and support member before preparing a detailed maintenance report. They explained that the bridge remained structurally sound but would eventually require routine preservation to ensure decades of continued service. Reading those recommendations made me realize something I had not fully considered before. Ownership carried responsibility as well as rights. Curious about the bridge's history, I visited the county archives where decades of transportation records rested inside carefully organized storage cabinets. An archivist helped me locate original construction files, maintenance correspondence, historical surveys, and recorded easement documents dating back many years. One document after another confirmed the same story. The county had approved access across the bridge through a recorded easement, but ownership of the structure had always remained with the private parcel now listed under my name. No recorded transfer had ever changed that fact. I requested certified copies of every relevant document and placed them inside clearly labeled folders alongside the survey, engineering report, title documents, and deed already waiting inside my office cabinet. The growing collection looked less like preparation for an argument and more like the history of an overlooked asset finally being understood. Meanwhile, life inside the neighborhood continued exactly as before. Landscaping crews trimmed shrubs near the entrance. Delivery trucks crossed the bridge throughout the day. Residents walked their dogs along quiet streets while children rode bicycles home from school during the afternoon. Catherine Sullivan occasionally sent additional letters encouraging cooperation with neighborhood standards, but I responded only through courteous written explanation supported by county records whenever necessary. I never mentioned the bridge because I wanted every conclusion to emerge naturally from verified evidence instead of dramatic announcements. One quiet evening I stood halfway across the bridge while the last sunlight reflected across the river below. Vehicles continued rolling past toward the subdivision, their tires producing a familiar rhythm across the steel decking. I rested one hand against the weathered guardrail and looked toward the community beyond the trees. Sooner or later someone would examine the same records I had just finished organizing. When that day arrived, no debate, assumption, or neighborhood rule would matter as much as the simple collection of documents waiting inside my office, each one quietly confirming that the most important connection to the entire community had never changed owners at all. Everything changed during the Next Homeowners Association board meeting, although nobody realized it when the evening began. I attended carrying the same leather document case that had followed me from the day I purchased the property. Inside rested the recorded deed, certified county parcel maps, the folded easement, the independent survey, and the engineering inspection report. The clubhouse buzzed with quiet conversations as board members discussed landscaping budgets, seasonal maintenance, and plans for expanding walking trails near the entrance corridor. Catherine Sullivan welcomed everyone with her usual confidence before eventually turning toward me. She explained that because previous conversations had not resolved our disagreement regarding neighboring property standards, the board hoped to reach a final understanding that evening. I thanked her for the opportunity and calmly stood beside the conference table. Instead of debating opinions, I placed the county parcel map where everyone could see it. Several members leaned forward as I traced the property boundary surrounding the bridge with a simple pencil. Catherine responded by pointing toward a large development map hanging on the wall, explaining that the neighborhood had always considered the bridge part of the community. I nodded politely before removing the certified deed from its protective sleeve. The county recording stamp remained perfectly visible beneath the meeting room lights. Next came the recorded easement, followed by the independent survey completed only weeks earlier. Finally, I placed the structural engineering report beside the other documents. The room gradually became quiet. One board member adjusted his glasses and compared the legal description printed on the deed against the survey map spread across the table. Another quietly unfolded the easement and began reading the recorded language line by line. Catherine's expression slowly shifted from confidence to careful concentration as she realized the easement granted legal access across the bridge without transferring ownership of the structure itself. Nobody interrupted the silence because the document spoke more clearly than any argument could have. After several long moments, one of the association's attorneys, who had attended only as an observer, asked if he could examine the certified copies more closely. I handed them to him without hesitation. He compared the parcel identification numbers against publicly available county mapping records displayed on his laptop. The numbers matched perfectly. He then reviewed the survey, the deed, and the recorded easement once again before quietly looking toward Catherine. Without raising his voice, he explained that the bridge appeared to remain privately owned while residents possessed recorded legal access through the easement. Those two facts existed together without contradicting each other. Several board members exchanged surprised looks. They had always assumed ownership and access meant exactly the same thing. I calmly explained that I had never intended to interfere with anyone's ability to cross the bridge. Families depended on it every day, and the recorded easement fully protected that access. My only concern had always been ensuring that ownership, maintenance responsibilities, and future decisions reflected the actual legal records rather than long-standing assumptions. When the meeting finally ended, nobody argued. Instead, people quietly gathered around the table to study the documents one last time before leaving the clubhouse. Outside, evening traffic continued flowing steadily across the bridge beneath a sky filled with fading shades of orange and blue. Drivers crossed the river exactly as they had every day before, completely unaware that inside the meeting room a collection of old papers had just transformed the understanding of the most important piece of infrastructure connecting their entire community to the outside world. Within 2 weeks, the quiet discussions inside the clubhouse became formal legal correspondence. Catherine Sullivan informed me that the Homeowners Association intended to seek a judicial declaration clarifying ownership, maintenance obligations, and the scope of the recorded easement. I was not surprised. Questions involving critical infrastructure deserve definitive answers supported by the law rather than assumptions carried forward over time. My attorney agreed immediately and assured me that allowing a court to interpret the recorded documents would provide lasting certainty for everyone involved, especially the families who relied upon the bridge every single day. On the morning of the first hearing, I arrived at the county courthouse carrying the same leather document case that had accompanied me since the property closing. Inside rested the original recorded deed, certified copies of the access easement, county parcel maps, the independent boundary survey, bridge inspection reports, historical maintenance records, and certified copies of the county recorder's archived filings. Across the courtroom, Catherine sat beside attorneys representing the Homeowners Association while engineers, surveyors, and title specialists organized large rolls of maps across their table. The judge entered promptly and explained that before discussing maintenance responsibilities or future agreements, the court first needed to determine ownership of the bridge and the legal effect of the recorded easement. The association's attorney spoke first, emphasizing that residents had relied upon the bridge for many years, that the neighborhood had continuously maintained landscaping around the entrance, and that everyone reasonably believed the bridge functioned as community infrastructure. The presentation was respectful, detailed, and supported by photographs of everyday neighborhood traffic crossing the river. When my attorney stood, he did not challenge those facts because none of them were disputed. Instead, he quietly placed the original deed before the court, followed by the certified parcel map, the recorded easement, and the independent survey completed only weeks earlier. He carefully explained that uninterrupted public use through a recorded easement did not automatically transfer ownership of the underlying structure. The easement guaranteed lawful access while title remained exactly where the recorded deed placed it. The judge examined each document slowly, comparing legal descriptions, parcel numbers, survey coordinates, and recording information with remarkable attention. Next, the licensed surveyor testified under oath, describing how every original monument had been located and verified against county archives using modern surveying equipment. Large courtroom displays projected the bridge parcel over historical aerial imagery, making the legal boundary unmistakably clear. The engineer who inspected the bridge then explained its condition, maintenance history, and structural responsibilities, confirming that his review identified the privately owned parcel as the location of the entire bridge structure. Even the association's engineering consultant acknowledged during questioning that none of the development planning documents had ever transferred ownership of the bridge away from the original parcel. Silence settled across the courtroom as the evidence aligned from multiple independent sources. The judge thanked both parties for presenting organized, professional documentation and announced that the evidentiary record clearly established ownership while reserving further hearings to determine future maintenance arrangements and long-term responsibilities. As we left the courthouse that afternoon, traffic continued flowing steadily across the bridge exactly as it had every day before. Nothing changed for the families traveling home because that had always been my intention. The only thing that changed was that the law had begun replacing decades of assumptions with carefully documented facts that could finally guide every decision made from that day forward. The second hearing felt noticeably different because the discussion had shifted away from uncertainty and toward practical responsibility. By then, nobody inside the courtroom questioned where legal ownership rested. Instead, every expert who entered the witness stand focused on a far more important question. How should a privately owned bridge that served an entire community be managed fairly for everyone involved? I welcomed that conversation because it reflected the position I had held from the very beginning. I had never wanted recognition for owning the bridge. I wanted clarity, responsibility, and a long-term solution supported by accurate records rather than assumptions. The courtroom, filled with transportation engineers, licensed surveyors, title specialists, and county infrastructure officials carrying thick binders filled with inspection reports, historical maintenance files, and engineering drawings. One by one, they explained the bridge's history in remarkable detail. The chief structural engineer projected enlarged photographs showing every steel support, drainage system, expansion joint, and concrete foundation. He testified that routine maintenance had been performed over many years by different contractors, but none of those invoices changed the underlying ownership recorded in county land records. The licensed surveyor returned to the witness stand and demonstrated how original boundary monuments placed decades earlier still aligned perfectly with modern satellite measurements. Every coordinate matched the recorded deed without discrepancy. A county transportation official then reviewed archived files documenting the original access easement. He explained that the easement guaranteed uninterrupted travel for residents, emergency responders, school buses, utility companies, delivery services, and visitors while preserving ownership of the bridge within the privately owned parcel. Those two legal concepts had existed together for decades, even if very few people fully understood the distinction. Catherine Sullivan listened carefully while taking notes beside her legal team. I noticed her posture had changed since our first meeting months earlier. The certainty that once defined every conversation had been replaced by thoughtful attention to facts. During a brief recess, she approached me quietly in the courthouse hallway. There was no anger in her voice. She simply admitted that the association had relied upon planning documents prepared years after the subdivision was built without ever comparing them against the original county records. I appreciated her honesty because mistakes rooted in incomplete information deserved correction rather than resentment. When the hearing resumed, the judge summarized the evidence presented by every independent expert. The deed, certified surveys, engineering reports, archived easement, county transportation records, and title history all pointed toward the same conclusion. Ownership belonged to my parcel. Access belonged to the easement. Maintenance responsibilities could now be negotiated through a formal recorded agreement benefiting everyone who depended upon the bridge. As the afternoon sunlight poured through the courtroom windows, I realized the bridge itself had never really been the source of the conflict. The real issue had been assumptions surviving longer than the documents capable of correcting them. Walking outside after the hearing, I paused beside the courthouse steps and looked toward the valley where the river quietly continued its journey beneath the steel structure. Hundreds of vehicles would cross that bridge before sunset without noticing anything had changed. That was exactly how I hoped the story would end. The strongest legal victories are often the ones that allow ordinary life to continue uninterrupted while the truth quietly takes its rightful place in the public record. Several days after the final hearing, our attorneys met inside a quiet conference room overlooking the county courthouse instead of returning to another courtroom. Thick binders filled with surveys, engineering reports, maintenance estimates, title records, and certified easement documents covered the polished table where both legal teams sat together. The atmosphere felt completely different from our first meetings months earlier. Nobody questioned ownership anymore because every independent expert had reached the same conclusion. The only remaining objective was creating an agreement that would protect the community while respecting the recorded rights attached to my property. Catherine Sullivan arrived carrying a folder filled with notes prepared by the Homeowners Association Board. When she greeted me, her tone reflected professionalism rather than disagreement. She acknowledged that the evidence presented throughout the hearings had clarified issues the association had misunderstood for years. I appreciated her willingness to move forward because lasting solutions rarely come from proving someone wrong. They come from giving everyone confidence in. What happens next? Our attorneys began drafting a comprehensive recorded maintenance agreement that carefully separated ownership from access responsibilities. The existing easement guaranteeing uninterrupted travel remained exactly as it had always been. Residents, emergency vehicles, school buses, utility companies, delivery drivers, and visitors would continue crossing the bridge without interruption. At the same time, the agreement established a structured maintenance program funded through shared responsibilities clearly defined inside the recorded document. Future structural inspections would occur on a regular schedule. Engineering evaluations would be completed by licensed professionals. Major repairs would follow transparent procedures supported by written reports and advanced planning rather than assumptions. Every obligation appeared in precise language designed to prevent confusion for future property owners and future association boards. We reviewed every paragraph slowly, comparing each provision against the county records already introduced during the hearings. The independent survey became an official attachment. The engineering report established baseline structural conditions. The recorded deed identified ownership. The easement confirmed permanent access rights. Together those documents created a complete framework that balanced private ownership with public reliability. When the final draft was complete, both parties signed the agreement before it was submitted for official recording with the county recorder. Watching the clerk apply the recording stamp reminded me of the morning I had first unfolded the original easement at my office table. The same quiet paperwork that had started this journey now brought it to a responsible conclusion. A few days later I returned to the bridge just after sunrise. Morning light reflected across the river while commuters crossed toward the neighborhood exactly as they always had. Delivery trucks rolled past, children rode the school bus, and joggers waved as they crossed the sidewalk beside the guardrail. Nothing about their daily routine had changed, and that simple normalcy became the greatest measure of success. The bridge remained open, the community remained connected, and every important question now had a documented legal answer preserved in the public record. Standing beside the weathered steel railing, I realized that ownership had never been about controlling who crossed the river. It had always been about accepting responsibility, protecting accurate records, and ensuring that future generations would inherit certainty instead of confusion. The strongest agreements are not built on victory over another person. They are built on facts everyone can trust, responsibilities everyone understands, and respect that lasts far longer than any dispute. Several months later, the bridge looked exactly the way it had the morning I first crossed it, yet everything surrounding it had quietly changed. The steel beams still reflected the early sunlight, the river still moved steadily beneath the decking, and the familiar rhythm of tires rolling across the expansion joints still echoed through the valley every morning. Families continued driving to work, children boarded school buses, delivery trucks arrived on schedule, and weekend visitors crossed the bridge without ever thinking about the legal history resting beneath the pavement. That was the outcome I had hoped for from the very beginning. One cool autumn morning, I parked my truck beside the weathered county marker and walked slowly toward the center of the bridge, carrying the same leather document case that had accompanied me through every survey, every meeting, and every court hearing. Inside rested the original deed, the recorded easement, the certified survey, the engineering reports, and the newly recorded maintenance agreement that now connected every piece of the story into one complete record. I leaned against the familiar guardrail and watched the first rays of sunlight spread across the water below. Looking toward the neighborhood, I noticed freshly planted trees growing taller near the entrance, new families walking along the sidewalks, and neighbors greeting one another as though the disagreement had never existed. In many ways, that was the greatest success of all. The community moved forward because certainty had replaced confusion. Later that week, I received a letter from Catherine Sullivan. Unlike the first envelopes that had arrived months earlier, this one contained no requests and no disagreement. She thanked me for approaching the situation with patience and professionalism rather than emotion. She admitted that the association had relied upon assumptions instead of original county records and expressed appreciation that the final agreement protected both the homeowners and the bridge for generations to come. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the original easement inside my document cabinet because both papers represented different chapters of the same lesson. One showed how misunderstandings begin. The other showed how they end when people allow facts to guide their decisions. Before locking the cabinet, I looked once more at the brass key resting in my hand. Months earlier, I had placed that same key into my pocket after deciding not to unfold the easement until the right moment arrived. That quiet decision had become the first step toward resolving everything that followed. As evening settled across the valley, I returned to the bridge one final time. Warm golden light reflected across the steel beams while the river continued its endless journey beneath my feet. Hundreds of people crossed the bridge that day without interruption, exactly as they always would because the law had preserved both ownership and access instead of forcing one to replace the other. I smiled as another school bus disappeared into the neighborhood beyond the trees, then closed my document case and walked back toward my truck. I had purchased 1,500 acres believing the land would become my greatest investment. In the end, the most valuable thing I protected was not the bridge itself. It was the truth recorded inside a few old documents, patiently preserved until the day they reminded everyone that real justice is built the same way as the strongest bridge, one solid foundation at a time.